Hello, today we are reading a selection from a book. It is The Kentuckians. As you can see, this is an older book. Um, it is written by John William Fox Jr. It is only available in print form, and it is just listed as a novel. This book was published, this version in 1971. But it actually was originally published, the book, in 1898. So, a much older book. And it starts out: the Kentuckians. The people of Little Kentucky capital did not often honor the gray walls of their state house. The legislators play small part in the social life of the town. A member must have blood as well as gifts unusual, who can draw from the fine old homes of people with a full century of oratory and social distinction behind them, and further back the proud traditions of Virginia. For years, young Marshall was the first to quite feel the measure, and he was to speak that afternoon. The ladies' gallery was full, and the governor's daughter Anne sat midway. About her was a sudden flutter and a leaning forward when Marshall strode a little consciously down the aisle and took his seat. When he rose to speak, the quick silence of the house was a tribute to thrill him. It was an oratory that one hears rarely now, even in the South. There was an old-fashioned pitch to the vibrant voice, the fire of a strong feeling in the fearless eyes, an old-fashioned grace and dignity of manner, and a dash that his high collar showed to be not wholly natural. The speech was old-fashioned and emotional, and the sentences full, swinging, poetic, rich, with imagery and classic allusion. And always, in a voice, eye, bearing, and gesture, was there a gallant consciousness of the gallery behind. More than once his eyes swept the curve of it, and when he came to pay his unfailing tribute to the women of his land, he turned quite around until his back was upon the speaker, and his uplifted face straight toward the governor's daughter, who moved her idle fan and collared as many an eye she was turned from him to her. The speaker's gavel lay untouched before him when the last period rang through the chamber. It would have been useless against the outbreak of applause that followed. Marshall had flamed anew from an already brilliant past, and was leaning back with luminous eyes and a proud heart. The gallant old governor himself was hurrying from under the gallery to bend over his protege and grasp his hand. The pit of the house buzzed like the hive of bees. Down there a Greek passion for oratory was still alive. And the older men and the young fellows stirred memories that were sacred, and the hum rose so high that the sharp rap of the gavel went through. It was twice unnoticed, then twice again. More sharply still, the speaker's face was turned to one dark corner of the room, where, under the big clock, stood a rough figure of a mountaineer, with his hands behind him and swaying awkwardly from side to side, as though his tug were refusing him utterance. Once he cleared his throat huskily, and a smile started on many a face, and quickly stopped, for it was plain that this man's trouble was not embarrassment, but some storm of feeling that threatened to engulf his brain and surge out in the torrent and invective. The mountaineer himself seemed fearful of some such thing, for with a turbulent calmness he began slowly and went on with great care. No reason was apparent, but at the sound of his voice the house turned towards him with the silence of premonition. One by one, wrinkles came into the speaker's strong, placid face. Marshall, quick to feel merit and generous to grant it, had straightened in his chair. The old governor, going out, was halted by the voice at the door, and one who himself loved the governor's daughter remembered long afterwards as she leaned suddenly towards the man, with her eyes wide and her face quite tense with absorption. The secret was in more than his simple bigness, more than his massive head and heavy hair, in more than even his extraordinary voice that came from him. It was an electric recognition of force, the force with which nature does her heavy work under the earth and in the clouds, and here and there an old member knew that a prophet was among them. It was an old fight, patrician against plebeian, crude force against culture, But the House knew that young Randolph Marshall, who had already challenged the brilliant traditions of the great forefather, who was a promise to redeem a degenerate present and bring back the great past, have found an easy pier in that awkward bog just risen before them, unknown. There was little applause when the mountaineer was done. The surprise was too great, and the people were too much moved. The German came at once, and everyone asked who the man was, and nobody could tell. This was the man outside. Anne Bruce came slowly down the oval staircase, and at the bottom Marshall was waiting for her. She smiled absently when he raised his hand, and two stepped from the Greek pergola into the sunlight and passed slowly under the elms and out into the sagging iron gate torn towards the old mansion. On the curbstone just outside stood one of the familiar figures to the streets of the capital. The man in stripes, a trustee on parole, whose square, sullen jaw caught Anne's attention sharply, as a sign of force in the face always. A moment later, the big mountaineer stopped there and talked kindly with the convict a while. Then, still in a tremor, he moved on alone across the town and through the old wooden bridge over the river, then out to the Devil's Hollow and the hills. Well, that's just chapter 1, a little piece of the Kentuckians. This is by John William Fox Jr. And we do only have this in print, so if you would like to request a copy, you can go to our website or you can call any of our locations. I thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time.